Hi, and welcome to the Soul and Survival podcast with Grant and Louise Bentley. We have run the Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy since 1995. We are both qualified practicing homeopaths, and Grant is also a naturopath. Together, we discovered a link between energy and facial structure based on traditional ideas from homeopathy that have roots going back 200 years. This project is called Homeopathic Facial Analysis, or HFA for short, and has been the cornerstone of clinical diagnosis and training courses since 1999. Between us, we have written and produced 7 HFA books, including Soul and Survival. Soul and Survival is the philosophy of energy influencing matter and how this energy forms individual facial structure, our unconscious drives and fears, our life patterns, and universal time cycles.
Hello and welcome to the Soul and Survival podcast. My name is Grant Bentley, and with me today is my wife Louise.
Hi there.
I don't know whether you can hear the kookaburras in the background, but we're in a nice little place in the country where we live, and often we'll have to shut the window when we do this because it's there's that many bird calls, and particularly the kookaburras, they're so loud that they'll drown us out. So if they're in the background there, well, there's a little taste of Australia. If not, I probably just made a bit of an idiot out of myself because you can't hear anything.
Well,
Okay, so last time we were talking about, because it's been a little while since the last podcast. Christmas has happened and a few other things. So, but we were talking about the colour groups in reference to history, and I think we had decided, didn't we, Louise, that we were going to spend this podcast talking about how the influence of history affects us as individuals. And the reason for that is because, we're as homeopaths, what we're trying to impart is just our knowledge and our experience, and that includes a lot of clinical experience with the idea of choosing a better remedy so clients and patients will feel better in themselves, and that's our role. And so the question of, well, what on earth has history got to do with any of this, is a valid one, but there's also an equally valid answer. Because when we talk about history, because I think we finished last time on the fact that there were diseases going through these 150-year cycles. Now, it's a long story as to why or how I worked out this 150-year cycle, but a cycle it is. And I won't go into the how the whole thing was developed unless you really want me to.
I always feel like we did speak about that a little bit, but
we do a little bit, but I'm not. I don't go into it in great detail. In some of the books, I think, or some of the courses that we do,
maybe the old course,
we might talk about how it was done. But by and large, I mean, most people just want to know what it is and why on earth it's even applicable in the first place, and how on earth can this be homeopathic? Well, the answer is very easily, because this all comes back to chronic diseases and the 6th edition of the Organon, where Hahnemann is talking about the different miasms, which are essentially just different energies. They're different forces. So I'm going to briefly describe in my mind what I think a miasm is, and then I'm going to move on with it, because we will have to come back to that at a later date, because that is an entirely... You could do 5 episodes just on what a miasm is, because there are so many variations within the homeopathic profession of what a miasm is. Now, of course, the standard Hahnemannian version of a miasm is an inherited disease where a person, each generation, gets weaker and weaker and weaker, and this is what Kent talks about also. So we are inherently getting weaker as a species. We're becoming more decrepit as a species. Our longevity is being decreased, not increased. But a lot of that just doesn't pan out to be all that true.
The evidence, the data would suggest maybe a tiny bit the opposite, depending where you live and how you live. But the stats for longevity overall are increasing.
Well, that's right. And people will turn around and they'll go, oh, no, hang on a minute. No, chronic disease is really bad and it afflicts a whole range of different people. Yes, okay, we might be living longer, but are we living better? Well, I would say actually yes, if you go about living the smart way.
Yeah.
So yes, I would think that we are living better. So in fact, I don't see any evidence that these miasms, against our will, are making us increasingly decrepit and cutting our lifespan short significantly.
Unless you don't live smart. That's
right.
The truth. That's
but then it's not the miasm, it's a decision.
It's the way you live in, which has got nothing to do with it, whereas Hahnemann was clear. It was something kind of travelling through each generation, inherited from one to the other. But you think something's inherited, so why don't you explain, like, I don't know about everybody else, but I like to hear your impression of what's going on, not so much other people's, although Hahnemann's super important, of course, but other ideas of miasms to me, once you listen to yours and you see how it works in the clinic, they're just gone. They're just theories. This is both practically real and it's a fabulous theory. So, yeah, tell us about your inherited theory.
Well, it was essentially came from the brief discussion that we just had and the conclusion that, in fact, we are not getting sicker. We're not living shorter lifespans unless you smoke a lot, drink a lot, or essentially eat a lot of sugar and junk food. I hate that word junk food because it implies that it's still food, where most of the time it isn't. It's just junk, not junk food. And the social experiment of intense carbohydrate diets into people's lifestyles just been absolutely miserable. So that being said, and that rant over, my idea of a miasm is one where the miasm is a protective energy that a person inherits, and it is there for that individual's benefit. For example, we spoke a little bit about the yellow group, colour group, and, the disease of leprosy and so on. And I will get back, so make a mental note there, and what I'll do is that I'll get back to what that actually means. But if I stay with yellow or the psoric group, now the traditional model has us thinking that psora is a functional disturbance. This is this whole layers thing, which I also think is not true. In fact, I think it's rubbish, and it's really led us astray for about 200 years. How is that possible? Everybody screams. How could we miss something for 200 years? Well, we did bloodletting for 1,000, and all of the experts were on board with that one. So to fool a profession for a generation or two, could it really be done? Yes, you bet it can, and really quite easily. Now, that's not to say that Hahnemann's ideas were trying to fool us. There's no chicanery here. People just do the best that they can, and I'll do the best that I can, and somebody else later on might come up with a much better theory than me, and hopefully they'll say, well, that Grant Bentley was well-intentioned, but here's where they went wrong. We know a little bit more now. And if that happens, well, then that's fantastic, because that means we have an evolving profession. So what I see here is, now back to the yellow or the psoric group. That's, in a traditional sense, it's always meant to be about how the disease is influencing us. And to understand psora is to understand the disease of psora. And psora is the thing that throws you know, that's that. Oh, geez, the name's just gone right out of my head now. The where you throw from the centre to the
circumference.
Periphery. Yeah, but anyway, it doesn't matter. There's a specific term for it for when that occurs.
Okay.
And I'll think of it the moment the podcast is finished. You know, and it's funny because I mention it probably about 1,000 times a week.
A specific word that means from the internal.
A centrifugal action.
Centrifugal action.
Right. I knew the moment I'd stop thinking about it, I'd think about it like everybody else, right? But it's a centrifugal action, meaning that any kind of infection or any kind of stress that is in the body of a psoriatic patient, that infection is going to be thrown to the surface, the periphery, where it can do the least harm to all those vital organs, the brain, the lungs, the heart, the liver, the kidneys, etc. So if that's the case, the question is, well, why would SORA do that? And why would syphilis do the exact opposite? I mean, why would a disease go out of its way to cause to be on the periphery and cause the least harm? A disease will, it's true, try to come to some sort of arrangement where both it and the host will benefit, but no, throwing it out to the surface where it doesn't have access to all of the material, all the bathed cells that it needs. No, that's not how it works. In fact, it's not the disease of SORA that's on the periphery. It is what I will call the psoriatic defense system, right? So to me, SORA, psychosis, syphilis, tuberculosis, psychosora, psychosyphilis and cancer, or red, yellow, orange, and blue, purple, not in any specific order, all of the different colours that we talk about, they are just mechanisms to explain the different immunological responses that we as individual human beings have been given to deal with infection. Which poses the question, well, why would you have more than one? Why wouldn't we all just have one way of being able to deal with infection? Well, that's simply because there are many types of stresses. And so if nature can... One of the things about evolution, it relies on a couple of things, but one of the major things is variance. If you have that variance, you have within a species, you have strength.
Diversity.
Yeah, that diversity is really important. So you've got to, in order for human beings to survive, and we are born survivors, we're going to face a whole lot of stresses and potential threats in our life, from infections to climate to a whole range of things. Because we've lived through ice ages as a species, we've lived through diseases as a species, shortages of food, attacks by animals, attacks by other human beings, a whole range of different things. And we need to, what nature does is that it creates a diversity of response. So it guarantees that all the things that can be thrown at us, at least some groups are going to survive it and survive it quite well. Hence the diversity. So when I look at what SORA is, or yellow, that is a person who has inherited an immune response, and remember that also is a stress response. I was
going to say it's more than just the word immune, isn't it?
That's right. So now what we'll do is we'll use stress response, and we'll use your immune response and your nervous system response, and we'll put it all into the term of defense response or defense system. So the yellow defense response is to try and protect the vital inner core by throwing any stressor capable of damaging the system out to the periphery as far away as it possibly can. Now, that sounds great, and it is great. It's a really fantastic defense system. So why doesn't everybody have it then? Well, because it's really energy expensive to do that. It takes a vast amount of energy to do that. So when you look at, say, the next primary colour group, if we go around the triangle of yellow, red and blue, what you see there is each one of those expends less energy than the one before it. So when you get to red, for example, red will try and, its defense system will try and protect the vital inner core by imprisoning that stressor in a pocket of either congestion or inflammation. So what it's doing is that it's limiting where it survives. Not just throwing it to the periphery, but limiting and trying to contain its movement. When we get to the blue, or the syphilitic defense system, it's really kind of trying to withstand the onslaught rather than even trying to control the stressor. So it's actually not even trying to influence the stressor. It's almost outpatiencing it.
Outweighed it, yeah. So that's really interesting, you saying it in that way. I've never heard you say it that way before. So I've got a question. Energy expensive yellow, medium expensive energy red, least expensive energy blue. There's no kind of hierarchy of judgment in there, is there? There's not like that one's better than the other. It's just they're different, right?
Yeah, that's just that they're different. There's not one of them is not more effective than the other, by the way. Yeah, I mean, even when you talk about, in traditional homeopathic terms, whenever you talk about the syphilitic, we've slid right down. We're right near the end of our snakes and ladders game, and we've just landed on the last snake and gone right down to the beginning again. That's supposedly what the syphilitic miasm is all about. Now, this withdrawal of energy to conserve energy means also, too, your recovery time is a lot quicker. Right, so there are benefits from this, and you see this in nature all the time. It's what hibernating bears are, or deciduous trees. So they're just waiting it out. They're not. They're not. They've decided that they're not going to expend the kind of energy that is required, particularly with a yellow defense response, and it's just going to withdraw that energy. And we've always seen that as a bad thing, but there's nothing bad about deciduous trees or hibernating bears. The moment the spring comes, they fare quite nicely, thank you very much.
Do you see that in the clinic, that there's some level of extra expensive energy in a yellow patient compared to a red or a blue?
Yeah, you do see that. And where you see that it is the yellow defense system has its limits, is you'll often find a lot of yellow people will come into the clinic with a never been well since episode, by comparison to, say, a person who belongs to the blue group.
And what do you think that means?
Well, it means that they've expended so much energy that the recuperation period's longer.
So do they need to have a different strategy as a type of patient in how they manage their energy?
No, but they do need a remedy afterwards if they don't replenish themselves. You know, these are people that will say to you, you know what, I had this flu, or I had this X, you know, whatever it is, and I've never really got back on track. That there are two groups that I think really fall into that category. One is the yellow and the other one's brown. Because they're trying to balance themselves out all the darn time. You know, they're trying that harmonizing thing of brown, and trying to keep your body in balance as best as possible is very energy expensive.
Yeah, right, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. So that's the three primaries in terms of their energy expense and the difference.
Yeah.
What about the other four, the three duo groups, which is orange, purple and green, and the trio, which is the brown?
Well, what I will do is that all right. I'll just go right back full circle because we were going to talk about how history influences us. So this is not a deviation from your question, but if we go right back to the beginning, we were talking about the 6th edition of the Organon. We were talking about chronic diseases, and Hahnemann sort of first starts to mention this embryonically as a theory, where he says that two opposite diseases can't live in the same body at the same time. The stronger will overpower the weaker, or, he says, being of equal strength, they will combine to form either a combination or a hydra-headed illness. That's what he says. Mm-hmm. But roughly paraphrasing, I'm pretty darn close, but he might be using a different adjective or a different whatever here and there. But that's essentially what he's saying. Now you put this into a colour group is just a different miasm, a different way of defending yourself against illness. And this also, too, completely eradicates the whole idea of a layers theory, which has never made sense. Everyone talks about the layers theory and you peeling off the onion layer and all that kind of stuff. You always say that. It's a bit of a cliched way of describing it. And true, but that's it's become commonplace way of talking and peeling it off like an onion layer. But it never quite works. And I'll tell you why it never quite works, right? Real life doesn't show this to be true as a theory. And when real life and theory clash, then your theory needs to be adjusted. Not like in modern times where we've got to suddenly readjust what we thought was real, but suddenly we need to convince ourselves that what is plainly obvious suddenly isn't, right?
That's another story.
Yeah, that's another story. But anyway, the thing is that when theory and practice clash, I've always gone by the idea that practice wins. So in reference to the layers theory, where I saw it clash is this, and we might have discussed this before.
Yeah, I feel like you're covering ground you might
but
have
it's
covered.
worth going through again, to be quite frank. It's worth going through again because when you have an illness that is, I think I'm pretty sure we chose migraines last time, so I'll stick with that. If you have migraines and you are supposedly, that migraine is a representation of the miasm that is behind it, then if you give a remedy that helps with those migraines, you have theoretically peeled off the layer of that miasm which created it in the first place, leaving the person, quote unquote, perfectly cured. Well, it never works out that way. Because the moment that there's an overwhelming stress, that person suffers migraines again. Now, I know that there might be the odd person that said, well, I never got it again. But that odd person is not the norm. The norm is that regardless of whether you get a good remedy or not, if that person was to lead a really stressful, a really demineralized and nutritionally deficient lifestyle, full of stress, sex, drugs, and rock and roll, they will get those migraines back. That's it. It's not about that they've contracted that particular syphilitic or psychotic miasm at that particular level all over again, and now we've got to go through the repealing process. It's not that. It's just an energetic balance. Now, what they need now is their energy is down. We give them a remedy. Luckily, our remedies are adaptogenic, so it doesn't matter whether you're in a stress state or a hypo state, and maybe we'll go into that at some stage. But you go back into this homeostatic range of energy, and the migraines then don't show themselves.
So you can still treat the migraine, and you can treat it to a point where it looks like it's almost permanently gone. But if it comes back, it doesn't mean that you first took the layer away and therefore what on earth's going on, it's come back. It's an ebb and flow. You have a predisposition to migraines, which is energy related, and when you get the right energy treatment, they lower to the point where they can be significantly improved, almost gone, if not gone. But if they come back again, there's been an energy change, so you adapt. I mean, the practitioner has to adapt, not just pat themselves on the back that, whoop, well, I got rid of that. End of story, what's next? That's a ridiculous premise in a clinic.
Yeah, we all have a boiling pot of signs and symptoms and pathologies. And that boiling pot can have a lid put on it, but you've got to have enough energy to put the lid on it. So when your energy starts to ebb, then a little bit at first boils over, which are mild signs and symptoms. And then if you don't have enough energy or you don't take heed, then it just keeps boiling and that lid keeps on slipping until finally the whole lid falls off. And now whatever is in that pot is just bubbling over and steaming, and now you're in serious trouble. But all that we're doing is that we're essentially giving you a remedy that gives you enough energy so your own defense system has the muscles to pick up that lid and put it back on.
And then you can operate at a mild simmer. You're not actually putting out the flame. You're not getting rid of the water. You're not killing the organism.
No.
You're just getting it to operate successfully within its own environment.
That's right. And you're not even changing the ingredients in the pot.
No.
So what you are doing, though, is you're stopping it from becoming a reality.
And I suppose probably because you've used the analogy of a lid, you should also point out that you're not suppressing it. You're just managing it.
No, it's a balancing act. When your energy is down, everybody's experienced this, so it really shouldn't come as any surprise. So let's just say, for example, you're prone to whatever. You're prone to 1, 2, and 3. Now, you know darn well whatever your 1, 2, and 3 are, that if you were to live a lifestyle where you're eating a lot of junk food, having a lot of late nights, working too much, all the things that are energy expensive, that after a while, that all of the catastrophe of 1, 2, and 3 are going to start to present themselves again. And when they do, that's when they're there as a warning, right? So it always starts off with a little bit of a simmer, to go back to the simile. It starts off with the slightly bubbling pot. And that's when you know that you should make the lifestyle changes that you need.
And support it with the energy of a good remedy.
That's right. And if that isn't enough, or you can't do that because you might find that your newborn is waking you up 6 times a night, or there's been an accident in the family and you're the primary carer, or you've got to go out and work 2 jobs because your mortgage has just gone up again. And, there's 1,000 different reasons why you need to burn the candle at both ends. And if you burn the candle at both ends for too long, you just end up with a really short candle.
Yeah.
And wax is just melting everywhere. And that's who you are. That's the state that you're in. And I've got patients where you can tell that burning candle at both ends. They know it, but there's nothing that they can do about it. So there's no use in the clinic being kind of all high and mighty saying, well, you've got to stop this. They're not in a position to stop it. So what you need to do is you need to be able to support them as best you can through this ordeal, and hope that when we get to the end of this ordeal, because nothing lasts forever, that when they get to the end of it, there's not too much damage that's being done because the remedies have propped them up. So sometimes it's a true preventative rather than it is even a treatment program.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm going to get you, excuse me, to go back to history and the link between history and the defense mechanisms, the 7 defense mechanisms.
Okay, so we know that Hahnemann was saying, and this is what a miasm is, the different miasms are different energies. Now, when that same energy is in a human being, it's a defense system. But when an energy is in a confined space, we know that energy will either be dominant, so you'll be yellow dominant, for example, or if the yellow and the blue are of equal dominance and one can't subdue the other, then that person will have a green or highly reactive defense system. So this is how we know that there's 7. So Hahnemann was absolutely right with the 3 primaries of sauropsychosis and syphilis, but I've turned them into colour groups because I want to escape the idea of disease, because if we keep on with the disease names, we'll keep on thinking that each of these groups is an infection in its own right, and we're back to the drawing board of what didn't work. So now what we have to do is we have to move from that philosophy, but you can see how close he was. Now, he was close, and so were the alchemists, by the way. I mean, mercury, salt, and
sulfur,
right? That's the whole. That was the whole sort of triad of the alchemists back in the which led to the philosopher's stone. Anyway, another story within itself. But essentially, homeopathy is alchemy made effective.
And practical alchemy.
Yes, a good remedy is the philosopher's stone. When someone comes in and they're in the green colour group and I take their signs and symptoms and they are in a really bad way, and, phosphorus is up the top and I give phosphorus and that person responds really well. They start sleeping again. They start relating to the world in a better way. Their headaches go away. They can walk upstairs again. They can do all of these sort of things. That's the philosopher's stone. That's what it does. It gives you a better outlook on life because we've taken you out of defense mode. Now, we might need to make a mental note to go back to that at another stage, because when you go through these things bit by bit, you don't realise how far HFA has come from the original homeopathic writings. I think it's far more sophisticated, and
yet it seems so simple. But there is a correlation between simplicity and sophistication.
In fact, I will go as far as to say that if a theory isn't simple and beautiful, it's wrong. The more complicated that it is, the more stratas that there are, the greater the chance that that theory's not right. God does everything in a beautiful manner. If it isn't symmetrical, if it isn't beautiful, and if it isn't simple, and in this case, keep hitting that, sorry. And in this case, clinically reproducible, then the theory's not right. You need to go back again.
So if we go back to the simplicity of these 7 defense mechanisms and their relationship to history, and what does that mean in real terms with what you talk about as inherited memories? Okay,
and I'll try not to whack the microphone as I get enthusiastic over this. So each miasmatic group has a period of time And this is not within a person now. When you're in a really confined space like a person or a cell, then that doesn't change. When you are in a larger group though, larger area, space. Like the Earth, the space they're confined, the Earth confines these energies into a tight space, but it goes in cycles. Right, so it doesn't stay the same all the way through. It goes in cycles. And that's that every 150 years approximately that it will go from yellow to, well, in this case, actually going in time frame, it goes from yellow to purple to red.
No, blue next.
Oh, yeah, yellow, purple, blue, red, green, brown, orange. Yeah. So orange is going to be the next time in 2100 or something, I think. So each one of these influences this. It's a toing and froing, like everything in life always is. It's a wave motion. It influences us. Like, for example, we live now in a brown time. Brown is all the three different energies. Don't you even need to use the term miasm, because we know they're different energies, because yellow is outward motion, right? That's that centrifugal action, but it's all through the universe. It's whether it's light or whether or not it's a centrifugal defense system in a human being. It's all throwing outward. Outward motion of yellow, circular motion of red, and the inward motion of blue.
Really, I think it's important to say that those three energies create everything in the universe.
Everything.
You know, whether it's a dark, what do they call it, a black hole, a dark hole imploding on itself going inwards, or it's the expansion of the universe, which is the yellow. First one was the blue, and the cycles of the planets is the red. Those three energies impact on every single solitary thing that happens in the universe.
Absolutely, they do. Those three energies, and you can put those three energies into proton, neutron, and electron too, if you prefer to understand it that way. And a proton, neutron, and electron are just different charges, and together they make everything in the material universe. That, it's incredible when you think about it. So anyway, the Earth goes through these cycles, and we're in a brown cycle at the moment. And what that means is that brown is all about trying to harmonize and balance those three energies. Because if one of them is dominant, remember, they're all vying for dominance. They're just a program. They're just an energy. They're going to expand, and they're going to take over, and they're going to wash over anything that they possibly can. Right? There's nothing psychopathic about this. It's not, you don't impart a human quality onto these things. It's like the sun. The sun will burn anything that comes too close to it. It's not its intention is to kill anything that it can. It's just that it's an energy, and that energy will overwhelm any other energy just if it is stronger. Now, inside the human cell or inside the human body, we have these three energies going on all the time. We know that because that's what protons, neutrons, and electrons are. That's all we are. It's what everything is. And they're all just doing their thing. And if in brown, what you've got, though, is you've got a body in which all these three energies are of equal strength. And now what happens is that the body is now, now we're going to get into the Hermetic table, the Emerald Tablet. We're going to get into one of the primary 7 rules. And I think it's the second Hermetic rule, which is as above, so below. And essentially that means how the macro works is how the micro works, and how the micro works is how the macro works. So inside this little pocket, which is us, or inside ourselves with these different energies, if they're all together, like in Brown, then what they do is that will be expressed in different ripples throughout the human being. But every emotion, every thought, every action will be an expression of that harmony or that balance. Now, I don't think that it's any coincidence when you look at this Brown time that we're trying to make sure everyone is as equal as possible. We're trying to make sure that there's no weaklings around, that everyone has their say, that everyone has equal rights. That one I agree with. That everyone has equal strengths and weaknesses. That one I don't agree with. But that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to harmonize, streamline, and we're trying to make everything as equal as possible. The good thing in society with that is that the weaker and those in need are catered for. The bad side of that is that the more beautiful, the more intelligent, the more smart, the more sophisticated are cut down to size. So we gain in one area, but we lose in another, unfortunately. So you wanted me to speak mainly on the yellow, so let's move away from Brown, but I wanted to just use that as an example because we live in this time, so it's easier to see it. It's easier to see, I'm in my 60s now, so I was born into a completely different world than what I will leave. And it wasn't really, more be kill or be killed, but there was definitely, you had to make it on your own. There wasn't a lot of that same support. If you were on the fringe, well, that's your life, brother, but, you stay on the fringe then if that's what you want. But everything now is an incorporation, and let's all embrace it and let's all love ourselves through it together. But that's just Brown influence, That's what balance and harmony is. Mind you, like I said, it can be pretty darn disastrous though.
Yeah, well, this is what's really important too, is each of these colours has a lot of positives. These defense mechanisms have incredible ways of progression for the individual and for their community and for their time, but they also have some really horrible parts to them. And I think just to point out in your book, Soul and Survival, which I've got open in front of me, it's getting on now. It was written in 2008, but it's still incredibly valid. And each of the colour groups has about 30 different traits, and you can put a positive or negative spin on each trait. Some traits are a little more negative than positive. But just with the times, I think for those who probably have never heard this before, you worked out in the last not quite 1,000 years, because if you go 7 times 150, it's 950. But in the last 950 years, starting at 1050, it was the orange time from 1050 to 1200. From 1200 till 1350, the yellow time. From 1350 till 1500, the purple time. From 1500 to 1650, the blue time. 1650 to 1800, the red time. 1800 to 1950, the green time. And 1950 to what you predict is 2100 is the brown time. And then it will start again with orange. 2100 to, what's my maths there, 2250 will be, which sounds such a long way out. But what's really, really interesting about the time we're in is that we're almost at the halfway mark, and there's 75 years into the 150 because it's nearly 2025. We're only a year off now. And if you look back at each of those 150-year cycles previously, you can start to see pivotal things happen at the beginning of a cycle, toward the middle, and then at the end, and then it shifts into the next cycle. And that's happening within people and within time. fascinating.
Yeah, it is. And the other thing is that towards the end of the brown cycle, there will be an orange influence starting to overlay.
Yeah.
Now, when you start to get into orange, now what you've got is that you've got yellow pushing outwards, you've got red just spinning in its own circle. The yellow will constantly push outwards because it's only an energy, it's not a thought, it's not an emotion, it's just a programmed energy. So it will just keep pushing outwards, and the red will just keep trying like a whirlpool to draw it into its orbit. And because they are of equal strength, what you find there is that there is a constant sense of friction. But there is a division between those two. There's friction and division
Resistance.
between those two energies. We saw that in the last Orange time, where Christendom versus Islam.
1050
and they didn't come to us because they're more red. They didn't come to us. We went to them because the European energy is a more of a yellow energy. And so we tried to push them out. They tried to resist. And it just ends up in this constant friction between two forces. Now, you can make of that whatever you will as to where does this mean we're going. Well, I don't claim to be able to read the future. So I don't know the details. I can only know that it's going to happen.
There will be resistance, and there will be sort of a dual
There will be a
system.
two-tieredness to society, and there will be resistance and friction between those two tiers. But in what form that will take, that I don't know. But I'll go back to the yellow, like right at the beginning of this conversation. We're running out of time. But what I'd like to do is point out that I'm going to use yellow as to highlight the ebb and flow that occurs between a time cycle and the people that live in that time cycle. So when I said earlier, if you go into that 1200 to 1350 time and you look at any book that is about epidemics, one of the really interesting things is the explosion of leprosy in that time frame. What Hahnemann considered to be a psoric, or the original psoric disease. He didn't say it was scabies, by the way. A bit later on, he says scabies-like eruptions and so on, but it was leprosy that he was. And if you really want to know more about that, I have a book called How Aphorism 27 Changed the World, which is Hahnemann's Aphorism 27, and the importance of that and how that flows on. And so grab that and have a read, because that has a lot more explanation into it than what I can do justice for here. So we have the yellow energy influencing us that can be seen through... It can be seen through the ideals of the time, just as the ideals of harmony and equality of brown is being seen on to be imposed on modern life. It's suddenly as if all of a sudden we've come up with this idea, but it isn't. It's the etheric pushing into us, and it's influencing us. But we can also influence it. So, for example, when you go through the time of leprosy and you see what happened, and I write about this in Soul and Survival, what happened if you were diagnosed with leprosy. All of the pain that is experienced in humanity during a yellow time or any of the colour groups is then imprinted on to the global energy of yellow. I hope this doesn't sound too wacky here, but we can, through our own actions and our own responses, we are succussing the more negative aspects. Oh, there I go. I've got excited again and I'm waving my hands around. Sorry about your ears. Okay, let me put it another way. We won't make it too dramatic, hey? Let's just say your dog died last Tuesday. If I asked you what you were doing 3 Tuesdays ago, unless it was, for most of the people, it's just going to be you got up, you went to work, you looked after your family, you came home. If I ask you what you were doing 3 Tuesdays again, you'll sit down there and you'll go, oh, God, I can't remember. I don't know. I went to work, I came home again, that's it. I don't remember anything. If I ask you on Saturday what happened last Tuesday, you'll go, that's where my dog died. Why do you remember that? You remember it because it was really negative and it was impacting and it was harrowing. The point is that when you start reviewing your life, you remember all the things that have an acute emotional content to them. And this is how our survival mechanism works. The more dangerous, the more emotional, and the more charged, energetically charged the moment, the more that event rises up the hierarchy of memory. But as above, so below. So whatever is happening in our time or yellow time, whatever is happening, particularly if it's emotionally charged and it's happening to a great volume of people, that's the succussion part.
So all the tragedy of all the people that had leprosy, and it was really dominant between 1200 and 1350, you're saying is impressed into the universal memory, like succussing energy into a remedy. It's the same kind of process.
That's exactly what happens. We imprint it then like a snowflake, which is just an imprint of the energy from the barometric pressure of which it was made. We then imprint the emotion of that time. Now, if it's one person, then it will be really low down the brown or the yellow hierarchy. If it happens to millions of people, though, like a World War II or a slavery of red time, or in yellow, like a leprosy epidemic, now all of a sudden you've got millions of people with millions of sorrow, millions of sadness, millions of fear, all being imprinted on. Okay, question then by someone would ask me, they would say, well, why, this is all negative. What about all the good things? Well, you know how, like in modern times, you have to say, yes, good question. You have to say that to everything. So, good question. All right, so good question, but it is actually a good question.
Good question, Grant.
Thank you. So, the good answer to that is that this is a defense mechanism. The miasms or the colour groups are a defense mechanism. They're not there for your happiness. They're there for your survival. That's it. You don't need to remember how to survive happy times. You only need to remember how to survive harrowing, severe, or dangerous times. So it imprints the harrowing, severe, and dangerous. And then what happens is that the next yellow time will be influenced by the succussive impact of the previous yellow time. But more than that, every person born today that belongs to the yellow colour group will have in their unconscious mind all of those memories in their unconscious of that yellow time, all those harrowing, dangerous moments will be in their subconscious, ready to be used if circumstances look like they're heading in a particular direction. It's their safety mechanism. They will not be aware of it. Notice that I'm not even saying subconscious, right? I think that I'm well aware of conscious and subconscious, and the whole sort of Freudian, Jungian, psychoanalytic sort of suppress what you don't want, and then that goes into the subconscious and so on. But I think there's a third layer, and that third layer I'm going to call your unconscious mind, because it is instinctual. You have no contact with it.
And it's not from this lifetime.
And it's not from this lifetime, and you cannot change it.
But you can use it in a positive way if you understand it.
You can recognize it, and you can recognize the circumstances that are going to throw that fight or flight mechanism, in this case the yellow or the brown, whatever, that colour group's mechanism into the foreground. It's always going to be there, and it's always going to be waiting, and it is there for your survival in the same way as if a snow leopard wants to hunt successfully, then it has to turn its coat from a yellow and black pattern into a white. And it has to do that, so otherwise it becomes obvious to see, and its hunting is limited. But you see, we don't physically respond in that way. Human beings, our defense mechanism, and I'm talking about as far as survival in the world, is all based on knowledge.
And memory.
Right? All on knowledge and memory. But we can't recognise all these things. So what it does is that every time, we'll stick with yellow, every time a yellow person will refer to, which means that they are an individual person whose defence system is dominantly in the yellow group, so they're going
outward motion.
So they're going to react in that outward motion way all the time, by the way. So you have no more say in this as you do in your own immunity. You're going to react in this way. And it's there to protect you, and it will surface even with certain fears. So I know people that have got, let me put it this way. The only difference between a rational and irrational fear, or let me even refine it. An irrational fear comes from the unconscious mind, and it is only irrational because we don't understand the time frame of which it came from. So
you mean the unconscious, not the sub, yeah?
No,
Yep.
So, for example, I've had so many people who belong to the purple colour group that'll have fear of witches, or they'll have a lot of suspicion that they're being watched, or they'll have a morbid fear of fire or being burnt. Now that's all sounds completely irrational. Why would a kid have, and let alone an adult, all the way through their lives, but they've learned to manage it, but why would they have these irrational fears? It's only irrational if you don't understand that purple comes from witch hunts, witch burnings, all those things that occurred during the Black Death. Now suddenly, if you remember that you actually have a fear of being watched, the fear of being condemned, a fear of being judged as a witch, a fear of being burned at the stake or hung, now suddenly why a kid has these fears is suddenly not as irrational as you think. Because once you've worked out that they're purple and here's what they're displaying, you can see or hear that, in fact, look, they're in context. But what you've got to do, so they're in context in the sense that they come from a real place. But that real place no longer exists because now you're in modern brown times. So now they're out of sync and they're irrational. And they can definitely be put in their place with the right remedy.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And if you go back to the yellow, another really interesting correlation is that the disease the dominant disease, which carries the dominant energy of outward motion of the yellow time, is leprosy. And of course, it affects the periphery of the body. It affects the outer parts of the limbs, the feet and the hands. It also, the way they dealt with it was by throwing people out, pushing them out into, a lazarette or whatever. And that meant leaving the family and being pushed out and cast out. And it's represented by the electron, which is on the outer. And so there's this whole yellow energy of being on the outer, or fearing being on the outer to such a degree that they will cling on to blood family in a way that's really quite aberrant.
Absolutely, they will. They were also forced to just take up arms and have their leptin, and it was the only way that they would survive. It's not coincidental that remedies like Serenum and Sora and so on, all of these anti-psoric remedies.
You mean sulfur?
Sulfur, I'm sorry. Mm-hmm. These anti-psoric remedies, like sulfur, for example, the prince of the anti-psorics, as Hahnemann used to call it, or the what we could say is almost the epitome of the yellow group, because it encompasses so many different symptoms because it's been so well proved. But all these remedies have a fear of poverty too.
Yeah.
Right? And this comes from this, this rattling of the tin over and
rags
over.
are riches.
Yeah,
and
rags are riches.
Yeah.
Other people will sit there and they'll say to the yellow group, well, I don't understand why you shouldn't be making such a big deal out of money. You shouldn't be so material. You should look for other values in life. And no one's saying that they don't see other values, but you know how some person one will go, their business will get burnt down, or their business will fail. And business two will be, person two will be in exactly the same position. Person one, however, is totally devastated and throws themselves under a train. Person two turns around and goes, well, I guess I've got no option but to start again. And, at least I've got my health, and at least I've got my family, and they don't mean it as a platitude. They genuinely mean it. Person one is more likely to be yellow. They're more likely to be affected by that because it is a core of survival.
Because of that memory, which comes from
that memory
such a long time ago. Hey, do you want to sort of tidy this up now, just from a time perspective, and maybe have a little look at each of the colours individually?
We can do that.
Yeah, like perhaps we could do red next time and then move through. And we move through in the order of, the three primaries, yellow, red, blue, and then we move around, orange, purple, green, brown. But in time, they don't go in that order. We don't know where, there's no start or finish as such, but if you start with orange, it goes then yellow, purple, blue, red, green,
and I
brown.
guess just to point out, when people say, well, what is the clinical reference here? The clinical reference is in understanding how much this stressor is affecting your yellow patient.
Yeah.
And the more that they are affected, the more the energy of the remedy is going to be needed to prop them up. So it's a great prognosis tool as to how much of a remedy is going to be needed, how frequently you're going to need to use it. All of these things come into effect, and they are all the flow-on of understanding how deeply somebody is being affected by certain life events, when those life events then trigger you to your unconscious fearful core.
Okay.
All right.
Brilliant.
Well, let's finish then. Thank you, everybody, for listening. I know we went a bit longer than we probably normally do, but if you have been able to sit it out, well, thank you for your patience. So, I'm sorry that I keep hitting the microphone as I wave my hand my hand at the moment, because I've got an injury and I'm in a sling at the moment, which hopefully will come off in about 2 weeks. But I keep misjudging and hitting the microphone. So I hope your ears are okay. And if they are, and you feel like tuning in next time, you are more than welcome. So for now, from me, goodbye.
Yeah, goodbye. Thanks, Grant. Thanks for listening to Soul and Survival. If you are interested in more information, books, courses, consultations, learning more about facial analysis or life themes, please visit our college site, Victorian College of Classical Homeopathy, vcch.org.